Well, howdy, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. My name is Jason Mark. I'm the editor of Sierra Magazine, and I'm coming to you from Bellingham, Washington, which is the traditional homelands of the Nooksack and Lummi peoples, also known as the Lac-Timesh peoples. I'm one of the hosts of these discussions, which give you all, our members, supporters, donors, a chance to hear from our leaders about the work we're doing here at the Sierra Club to promote clean air, clean water, a stable climate, and to make sure that everybody's got equitable access to the outdoors. This is our first Sierra Forum of the year. We've got a very important guest, our new executive director, Ben Jealous. As usual, we're going to do about 25 to 30 minutes of conversation with Ben and I, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A because we want to hear from you all. I know Ben wants to hear from you all and to answer your questions. If you have a question today, just go to the bottom of the screen there. You'll see a little box that says Q&A. Put your question in there. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. Before we dig in, I do want to talk about some of the latest news in our space from the last week, a mix of good news and bad news. First, the good news, in case you missed it, last week, President Biden designated 2 new national monuments, Ave Qua Ame in Nevada and the Kastner Range in Texas. Together, these are going to provide permanent protections to more than 500,000 acres across the greater Southwest and Texas. We also got new protections for South Dakota's Red Creek watershed, including a 20-year ban on mining there. And that's a really great story because that was actually a great partnership between our South Dakota chapter and our Wild America campaign, which awarded that chapter funds to promote its 30 by 30 work to protect 30% of lands and waters by 2030. Now, unfortunately, the less good news, also this month, the Biden administration, in case you missed it, moved to Greenlight, the ConocoPhillips controversial Willow project, oil and gas drilling on the north slope of Alaska. We here at the Sierra Club, along with partners and other environmental groups and indigenous groups, have already filed lawsuits to stop that. But it's a real threat because if this thing goes through, it will be one of the largest sources of carbon pollution in our country. And also just last week, in case you missed it, the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change released its latest assessment about the state of climate science. And they once again warned us that we've got as little as 10 years to avoid catastrophic climate change and overshooting the dangerous levels of warming. But to give us the long view, that's, of course, at the Sierra Club, we're grinding every week to protect lands, waters, wildlife, and a stable climate. But let's hear about the long view from our new executive director, Ben Jealous. He's going to put all this and more in context. Now, Ben, in case you've not heard about him or before, he's served in roles as an organizer, as an investigative journalist, and as the president of 2 of the nation's largest and most influential organizations working on justice and democracy. In some ways, Ben's background and his interests and his passions are classic Sierra Club. And in many ways, Ben's interests and his passions and his background are new and exciting for this organization. Well, let's hand it over to Ben to introduce himself. I'm not going to steal his fire. Ben, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Jason.
Ben, for those of you who've not had a chance to hear your story, can you share a little bit about your own personal journey that brought you here to the Sierra Club?
Sure. You know, my childhood was split between Northern California and West Baltimore. My parents had met as school teachers in West Baltimore. Their marriage was against the law. And back then, it wasn't just illegal to get married across racial lines. Once you did, you weren't allowed to reside in the state of Maryland any longer. And so in 1966, they headed out west and ultimately settled in Northern California. Where I was born in Carmel, it was the home of Ansel Adams and a lot of his proteges. And our friendship circle included a lot of his proteges. It was also the home of the Ventana chapter of the Sierra Club. And I was in and around that chapter as a kid. When I was 15, I had been volunteering as a tour guide at the Monterey Bay Aquarium for a couple of years. I'm actually apparently the only teenager in the history of the Monterey Bay Aquarium to be a tour guide. In the first and second class of tour guides, it was simply that you took a college marine biology class. To qualify, I think they thought that would make sure that no young people applied. I just took the the course when I was 12, so I could be a tour guide. And I'm pretty sure it must have been the general counsel who pointed out it's probably not safe to have these little kids in here. But they let me continue to do it. Julie Packard told me a couple of weeks ago, I'm the only one whoever got through their system is basically the Doogie Howser of the modern day aquarium. When I was 15, buddies and I decided to start a high school chapter of the Student Environmental Action Coalition, and we were told that they didn't have any high school chapters. And honestly, the college kids didn't seem too interested in trying to really help us get up to speed. And so it was folks associated with the Ventana chapter that, said that they would kind of, essentially give us the confidence that we could do this, help us figure things out. And the first rally that I ever organized, in my life, not involved with my parents in any way, who were both civil rights organizers and activists, was an anti-clear cutting rally against Max Am at the California State Capitol as part of SEEK. I'd stay active with SEEK until 1994. Helped set up their People of Color Caucus, one of the first national environmental justice formations, but also a formation, frankly, just of Black and brown environmentalists. And those two things are different. Sometimes when you're Black or brown, this movement, everybody assumes you're an EJ activist, and it's just not the case. And then I got kicked out in '93 of Columbia University for leading an environmental justice battle. Both historic preservation and environmental justice. On the side of Malcolm X's assassination, Columbia intended to build a center for the commercial manipulation of viruses of a type the EPA said did not belong within 50 miles of a densely populated area. And there they were, putting it in one of the poorest and most densely populated sections of Manhattan, Washington Heights. And when we were kicked out, we were the first students kicked out of Columbia in 20 years for organizing. It's kind of like gave my career, Jason, a shot in the arm. I ended up crisscrossing the country for SEEK, for the Student Environmental Action Coalition, leading their opposition to NAFTA on environmentalist grounds, because the factories that were going to move to Mexico wouldn't be regulated either because Mexico didn't have the regulations or they didn't enforce, depending on which type of poisoning you were worried about. And then I went to go work for a major green group, and on my first day was pulled in by the one Black executive. I think she was trying to help me, but she pulled me into her office and kind of spooked me. She said, "How does it feel to work for a white organization and know that will not change?" And it was my Black mother who had written the checks to that organization. They were kind of one of the groups that created canvassing-based fundraising. They were on our doorstep every 3 months, because I knew my mom would always give them a check whenever they asked. And my mom's Black, and to have a Black exec in that organization tell me it was a white organization that would not change, I left within 6 months. I went to the civil rights movement, never really looked back, but also never left the movement. This movement's been part of my life. I launched the climate justice program of the NAACP. That was really my first order of business, walking through the doors, their new CEO. And would ultimately go on the board of the Environmental Defense Fund and still sit on the board of the Wilderness Society and the Trust for Public Lands. And so that's been my life. If it was a little warmer, I'd be taking this call outdoors. I live on a designated bird sanctuary. It's 6 acres on the edge of the Chesapeake Bay. We're bordered by a beaver pond and surrounded by 1,000 acres of wilderness. And quite frankly, that's because the men in my family on my paternal side, we've been outdoorsmen in America as long as there have been outdoorsmen in America, back to about 1624. And just like on mom's side, I'm the first guy born outside the South, and on dad's side, I'm the first guy born outside of New England. But the men in that family, we always ultimately settle someplace where pine trees meet salt water. And I found my piece of that here.
Ben, thank you so much for sharing all that. I too am living in some place where pine trees, or in this case, Douglas fir trees and cedars meet salt water. So I love that line. Wearing all these different hats and being involved in all these different fights, whether it's back in the day against Maxam Corporation, or then leading for 5 years the NAACP. what have you learned? What has that kind of taught you about, movement building and your approach about how disparate people, disparate organizations can pursue shared goals?
Yeah, Van Jones and I started organizing together when I was 20 years old. So I think I was 19. I was on my way to being kicked out of college. And we had come together to help Haitians that were being quarantined in Guantanamo Bay because of this kind of hysterical fear that every Haitian had HIV, even though it appears that it was Americans who brought it to the island. And ever since then, Van has started new organizations, and I've taken over old organizations and rebuilt them. And that's kind of the difference between me and my old buddy. When you take over an old organization, you have to ask yourself, what made this place a rocket ship in the first place? Organizations I've led have typically been between 90 and now 130 years old. And there's been kind of three big ones. And then there's a separate set that were all around 30 to 40 years old, two of those as well. But in each case, it was their first 20, 30 years where they really just took off and they pulled away. When the NAACP was founded in 1909, 1910, there are I think about 20 racial justice organizations founded just in New York City in those 2 years. One of those is NAACP, one of those is National Urban League, and the other 18 you've probably never heard of. In the case of NAACP, what we figured out was that what made it a rocket ship was it focused on cases of extreme injustice against individuals as a result of Jim Crow, or as kind of leftover inertia from slavery. And so when I became head of it, I realized it had not grown, its membership had not grown more than 2 years in a row in 20 years or more. But we had 20 years of data, and it just went like this, and it never went up like that. And so we went back to what Amnesty International would refer to as individual casework. We're championing the cases of individuals who are being oppressed because of a terrible system that needs to be dramatically changed. We got some pushback. There were board members who said, why would you spend millions of dollars trying to help one person when you could spend millions of dollars trying to help millions of people? Fair question. The answer was, because we have to grow. As a tree person, if a tree's not growing, it means that it's dying. And the NAACP is the big tree in the ecology of civil rights groups, and in many ways of movement organizations in this country. It's the best known brand. And the Sierra Club is the big tree within the green space, within the environmental space. And so we did that. We went back to, we said, look, this is what grows us, because the doorway to a great cause is a terrible case. If we want to win bigger, we're going to have to get bigger. And so that was Trayvon Martin, Troy Davis, the Scott sisters, a number of cases that in their year or even for all time will be iconic. When I stepped down 5 years later, not only had we been growing, not only had we accelerated achieving our goals, we had abolished the death penalty in 6 states in 5 years, for instance, in large part because of the Troy Davis campaign and the way it shifted public opinion. But we also, my last real official duty was the 2013 convention. And on the last night of that convention, it was announced that George Zimmerman had been acquitted for killing Trayvon Martin. The next day, Black Lives Matter started. And that week, when I reviewed the footage of all the Black Lives Matter protests that had been carried on national television, the kids that had grown up in the NAACP, who had been leaders, I had just been with at that convention. If they weren't at the mic, they were standing right behind the person at the mic. We had raised them on a diet of championing cases of extreme injustice against individuals, including a lot of police killings. And there they were, ready to lead in the growing of the Black Lives Matter movement in their areas. Here at the Sierra Club, you asked that question, which you run right into, it's how John Muir did outings. John Muir lived at a time, the late 19th century, when there were all these sanitariums, not sanatoriums, there were all these places in the rural areas where people would go because the cities were full of smog. And folks went out there to get clean and to clean out their lungs, spend weeks in nature. And similarly, there are a lot of hiking clubs that were designed to get like urban professionals on the weekends out to clean air. But John Muir was less interested in getting you, into clean air than he was to getting inside your head. His outings were designed to change your soul, not just elevate your health, by getting you into the most beautiful places of the outdoors that once you experience that, you would never be the same. And some of those areas were close to cities like San Francisco. In some of those areas, you had to travel, basically a day, in a slow car into the wilderness, or days on a horse. But when he took Teddy Roosevelt camping, for instance, and he took him to what would become Yosemite National Park, he was intentional enough to know, man, if I take him here, a lot could change. And the entire National Park Service comes from that camping trip. And I believe where he took him was as important as him, if you will, in that equation. And so if we're going to get growing again, we really have to center our outings. We have to recognize them as what they are, which is sort of top of our activism funnel. And the thing that's always been symbiotic with those local outings are our local fights. Growing up in my school years were Northern California, summers were West Baltimore. Growing up in the school years in Northern California, our family always understood that drinking water in San Francisco was especially sacred because the reservoir for San Francisco used to be a valley called Hetch Hetchy that Ansel Adams said was more beautiful than Yosemite itself. And Sierra Club's membership, as best I can tell, spiked in the Hetch Hetchy fight. California is notorious for its water wars, and the people on the industrial side of that equation, like our oil and gas expansion battles now, frankly, win more often than they don't. And going up against them in California in the era of Hetch Hetchy, I'm sure seemed like folly to many. And yet Sierra Club dug in. And our rationale was pretty simple. Hetch Hetchy is one of the cathedrals of nature. A reservoir is the equivalent of a warehouse for water. Nobody builds a warehouse by tearing down a cathedral. So why would we do that, the equivalent of that in the natural world? Just find a dam, some other damn place for the hole in the ground that you need. Well, we lost that battle, but we attracted thousands of activists who said, I want to be a part of that group. I want to be part of the group that fights for what's right, even if they're up against great odds and are not sure that they can win. And of course, as a result, our tree grew much more rapidly, and we became much more impactful. And our climate campaigns that are transformative. We've run the most successful climate strategy in the US. We shut down more than 300 coal-fired power plants. All of that leveraged off of the fact that we are like the giant sequoia of environmentalist organizations. But again, in recent years, we've started to plateau. We've stopped growing. And that should concern all of us. And we got to get back to growing. And the way we do that is we center our outings. We do our outings in an intentional way that's really soul changing. And we go where those changed souls lead us, which will be into a lot of local preservation battles.
Thanks for sharing all that, Ben. I know I'm 100% confident that, especially for our longtime members and volunteer leaders, they're going to be energized by hearing that from you, because I think they know, like you do, that there's no substitute for just boots on the ground and getting people out there where they can really feel, the power of wild nature and kind of forge their own commitment and then take that to those local battles. We got a lot of questions coming here on the Q&A. Thank you all so much for being such an engaged audience. We're going to try to get to as many of these as we can. But before we do that, Ben, what do you think are the organization's top priorities? I know you just kind of took over, but what are the organization's top priorities for 2023? What's the top of the list, at least for the next kind of 9 months coming up here?
Yes, we our top priorities are one, all of our climate work, beyond coal, beyond dirty fuels, electrify everything. We got 10 years to keep this world below 2 degrees, hopefully below 1.5. And in order to do that, we got to stay full steam ahead. Closely related to that is our second priority this year, which is standing up our ambassador program for the Inflation Reduction Act. We've got to get an army of volunteers and supporting them, an army of staff out into the field. We have about 650 days left on the Biden administration. There's time to do plenty of good work in there. We've got to start moving even faster than we are on IRA implementation. I'm just coming back from a planning retreat where that was really central. And then finally, we've got to get back to growing again. And so one of the things that folks can expect from me is that I will bring sort of style of field leadership I think most visible in the American civil rights movement, which is national leaders showing up, their comms team doing advanced work to local areas where members are involved in critical fights in order to shine a bigger spotlight on that fight and, kind of leaven the situation in a way that gives advantage to our local activists on the ground. So that'll be, how I will help. It'll be visible in the media, but most of what I'm doing, frankly, is working this year to really get us retooled so that we center outings in a way that's intentional and we center local fights in a way that we understand helps the entire movement grow. Hetch Hetchy, if we had ever just let that be about, a fight, for folks in one of the 13 or two of the 13 chapters in California, the movement wouldn't have grown. But the whole Sierra Club back then in California was on fire about Hetch Hetchy. And when we have battles like the Lower Snake River that cuts across, your area, for instance, we should be on fire about that nationally. The other thing I'd say is, as we see Biden break his campaign promise not to drill on public lands, we need to realize that we're going to need to adjust how we fight to have greater success against the oil and gas industry in this moment. That we had a president who the movement turned, frankly, into a real climate champion. His first 2 years, something has spooked him, and he is, transforming into the best buddy of oil and gas in a long time. And that means that we're going to have to pivot as well. And figuring that out is also a priority at this moment.
Ben, I'd love it if just you and I could just keep on chatting. But of course, we've got all these questions coming in, and we got some great questions coming in. And so let's go to some of those, especially because we do have from the questions here some about the Willow Pipeline, what the organization's doing. And we've also got a kind of a tough, I would say a little bit of a provocative question here from Vincent about how it is even possible to get off of oil, and what is the roadmap for breaking our addiction to oil?
Yeah. We the first thing is to stop expansion. Honestly, we are a net exporter, and when you look at liquid natural gas, we're becoming the world's largest exporter. So let's start by keeping it in the ground here. Secondly, we have the technology. We have even the dollars. This investment, the Inflation Reduction Act, the associated infrastructure bill, it's the biggest shot in the arm building green industries and building green infrastructure that any country's ever made. We also have, quite frankly, is a bunch of corporations that are financially addicted to the status quo, none of them more than big oil, big gas. They're doing everything they can to obstruct that. And so when you look at us sort of moving beyond our addiction to oil, understand that we already have technologies, we've got to scale them. Understand that dollars have been allocated, they need to be deployed, and they will leverage more from industry. And what's on the other side of that is more manufacturing here, more good jobs here, vehicles here being produced at scale where demand meets supply. And when that happens right now, because frankly, the supply is much lower than the demand, as supply comes up, the prices will come down. And as the prices come down and more people buy them, what they'll discover is what I've discovered. And I've shifted completely just months before I took this job from gas vehicles to electric vehicles. They cost about a fifth as much to power. So my F-150 Lightning gets the equivalent of 70 miles to the gallon, and our Chevy Bolt gets 125. And the upkeep is maybe 15% the cost that it was on my old gas vehicle. So in other words, we have the technology and the money to build a future beyond oil and gas right now. And in doing so, create more jobs here and keep more money in people's pocket. And so we need to keep our eye on the prize and keep the faith, because this is our kind of like bionic man moment. We have the technology and we can rebuild our country even better.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm a little jealous. I'm still waiting for my F-150 Lightning, my one-man campaign to drag the Ford executives on Twitter. It's not seem to be working, but I'm gonna keep at it.
Well, hit me up offline and I'll tell you how we did it. We actually found it in 2 weeks. We boiled the whole ocean, but there's an easy way to do that with Ford dealers.
I will hit you up. We're gonna keep the next question here as a hometown one for you, from somebody from the Greater Baltimore group, from Spice. She's got a really good question about the intersection between plastics and the oil and gas industry. You know, she points out here that there's so much single-use plastics everywhere. It's obviously the question of plastic pollution is a hard one. And is there a way? Her question is, how can we beat the oil and gas industry and make them reverse this horrific spread of single-use plastics? Those are her words. But I guess I'm wondering, what do you see? Is there are there intersections there to sort of, perhaps use people's concern around plastics to actually go and leverage some of that outrage against the oil and gas companies? What's the intersection?
Yeah, I've traveled already to more than a quarter of our chapters, sat with local leaders and asked them what their priorities are and what they're working on. And what's clear is chapters all across the country are focused on fighting single-use plastic. And that's the beauty of our moment, of our movement, that we don't have to sort of create a national staff structure to get people to start working on something, far, far from it. Our volunteers are on the ground, they're motivated, and frankly, they're problem solvers. And when they see a problem, they tend to go after it. And so independent of the national kind of program structure, we're doing work everywhere on fighting single-use plastic. I would like to see us find the resources to be able to support that work and to give more, firepower to it, better coordination. We are working on a plan to really bring back national activist gatherings here. I think that will help a lot. I'll get people together in person coming out of COVID and let them educate each other and exchange strategies. But honestly, what's been working is getting localities to pass ordinances banning it. Banning plastic straws, banning plastic bags, banning plastic bottles for water, and therefore creating demand for metal bottles for water. And, really, frankly, encouraging people to bring their own bags, but if not, giving them a paper bag that at least will turn into dust at some point. That's the type of work that we need more of. And the good news is that we have activists, as far as I can tell, pretty much every chapter working on the single-use plastic issue. Yeah,
thanks for that, Ben. And again, I know some folks are having a hard time picking up my audio, so I'm going to hold this mic a little bit closer to my face. We have a lot of questions here that are sort of nibbling at the edges of a big one, which is question of agriculture. Some people here are mentioning biofuels. People are mentioning agroecology and carbon sequestration. I know that our federal policy team, headed by folks like Melinda Pierce and Mahir Sarar, are working really hard and already watchdogging the Farm Bill, which is a big piece of legislation that must pass this year. Do you have any thoughts on how the Sierra Club can, I guess the question is, also keep a little bit of an eye and prioritize farming and food and agriculture policies that are climate smart and climate wise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the good news is that the IRA does include dollars for promoting and accelerating the spread of regenerative farming techniques. And the good news is that, again, getting back into green tech, there are products out there like, seaweed additives for cows that reduce their methane output by like 80%. And that's exciting. With this farm bill coming up, we need to really make sure that the farm bill starts to shift the momentum towards regenerative agricultural techniques. And I'm hopeful. There is, quite frankly, there is a budding industry there. And in America, our democracy tends to respond to industry. And so the fact that we're starting to see more and more companies in this space does give me hope that we will find, as we dig into the farm bill, different allies, especially in the Republican Party, that we can, help us cobble together the support we'll need to start shifting American agriculture further away from its dependence on, frankly, really dangerous chemicals and really destructive techniques.
So we got as you know, a broad range of members. Their interests are varied. So we're skipping around a lot. We got a lot of different questions here. So we're going to toggle from policy back to movement building, because we got a question here from Raymond that I think is really important. Raymond says the biggest problem the Sierra Club has had is that our members are old and getting older. If we're going to grow, we must attract younger members. This has been a trend for decades. How do we attract younger members? So Ben, what would be your answer to Raymond there?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is Bill McKibben's out there growing a whole organization just to old folks. Like, let's give those somebody who just got their AARP card, and like you, Jason probably has more gray in his beard than he's really comfortable with. Let's give the gray-haired people their due. When I was a young activist, I was taught Politics 101 by a guy named Charles V. Hamilton. He was the co-author of Black Power with Stokely Carmichael, and he was the first tenured Black poli-sci professor at Columbia University. And he would really admonish people who wanted to center attracting more and more young people into your movement as your primary strategy for growth. And he believed that the young were important. But he just pay attention to the numbers. He'd say, look, the activists at any point in American history come from those around university age and below, and those around retirement and above. And you take the latter at your peril, because they are wealthier, they are way more likely to vote, and there are way more of them. He explained that those are the two activist generations because they have two things in common. Each sees himself as having disposable time, at least some, and they're each eager to change the world. One's about to take responsibility for it, wants it just a little better, a little more fair. The other one's about to leave it and wants to define their legacy, and what they leave behind. But whatever the motivation is, your growth is going to come from the biggest numbers. And the biggest numbers are people over 50, people over 60. And as we see longevity increase, especially honestly for Americans who are educated, something else is happening for Americans who don't have college degrees, unfortunately. Those numbers aren't just going to grow because of new folks coming in. They're going to grow because existing people are staying longer than they used to. And so I'm all for it, just like as I was at the NAACP growth. I'm all for recruiting more young people, and I will never take our older activists for granted, because if we're honest, it is like the hidden secret of our power. And it's okay, if your structure is a bit like PBS television. Like, we all watched it when we were young, and then we basically tuned out for decades. And then one day you wake up, usually in your 40s or 50s, and you're like, British mysteries are oddly appealing, And so it's okay, I was around Sierra Club when I was in diapers, and I was around Sierra Club when I was a teenager, and I kind of checked out for various reasons in my early 20s. And here I am, I'm 50 and I'm back. And, I suspect I'm not the only one who's had a journey like that.
Yeah, I do want the record to show, Ben, I'm this side of 50 still. So
yes, I know, brother, but you're that side of gray hair. That was.
But I really appreciate what you're saying, right? Which is that, passion needs and young people often provide a lot of passion and fire and and the ability to just grind and go all the time. And older folks provide lots of other things, wisdom foremost among them.
Yeah, but also young people have a time limit before they're going to need to pay for a mortgage and raise kids and check out for a bit. And old folks, again, have many decades typically in front of them where they'll be active and they can give a lot of time. And one thing I would say is this: young people do define the cutting edge of any movement, and oftentimes they short circuit their own leadership, thinking that they're only capable of leading other young people. And when actually, if you think about it for a second, while there are a lot of young activists who are willing to follow other young activists, there are no old activists who didn't start out as young idealists, and they're eager to follow young activists too. I mean, it makes us feel younger, more interesting to ourselves. So I think there's a disproportionate role for young people to play in leadership. We talk about, Greta, for instance, a lot, disproportionate role. But man, don't try to win a battle without an army of old folks. Those are your voters, those are your donors. And again, there's way more of them. And they will follow the young. And young people, one thing we'll be doing more of here is more intergenerational activist training for exactly that reason, is you end up with a movement that's bigger and still on the cutting edge.
Yeah. There's another question about building the organization, making the organization more inclusive. Here's the question: How can we create the opportunity for more people of color to engage with the Sierra Club? This questioner says, "I am the first Black chapter leader and the only one," I think meaning the only Black person in my chapter. Will there be better direction on how the organization can become more inclusive? And I think this means racially, ethnically inclusive under your leadership.
Sure. I'd say a couple of things. I was out in a chapter recently. It was younger, it was more diverse as far as its XCOM. And I asked somebody, what's going on with that chapter? And they said, oh, well, they applied to be part of a pilot program where they get to pick some of their XCOM members. The chair, I guess, gets to appoint some of the XCOM members. That strikes me as very smart, because while Sierra Club is its own organization, while Sierra Club is a part of many coalitions, Sierra Club internally is also a coalition itself. And you see that when you sit with the XCOMs, you listen to people and how they got involved and what they're involved with and so forth. And I think take the Black community for instance. If I was a chair of a chapter that was able to appoint members, I would go find a Black activist preacher who was followed by other Black activist preachers and appoint them to the XCOM to build that coalition. I would probably, go look for somebody who's a leader, in the gay rights movement, and who's, is respected by their peers, and appoint them, and so forth. It's so that when you have communities like the gay community, like the Black community, that are very well organized, that have lots of different organizations where people are very busy volunteering with various things, getting a leader who can bring other leaders to the table, bring people, to the events inside of our tent, inside of our internal coalition, I think would go a long way. The other thing is, quite frankly, recognizing that most Sierrans, certainly who are adults, are college educated. And so looking for, Black folks, for brown folks who are already 10 out of 10s on, on the algorithm, if you will, of who tends to be excited to join the Sierra Club. Looking for Latino people, South Asian people, Native American people. And then as an organization, deciding to also recognize we don't have a lot of white folks who don't have college degrees, even though there's a lot of them. And deciding to take on that class barrier with everybody, recognizing that we're going to need white folks who aren't college educated and brown folks who aren't college educated. But if you sort of let Black and brown people be where you're trying to go across that kind of invisible class line that really limits Sierra Club, I think, almost more than anything. And so you're going after Black and brown folks who aren't like the white folks that you're with. It's gonna be harder. So recognize what you're doing. First, I'd say, expand within the group that you're already a part of, which is basically primarily college educated folks, just to be real plain. And then second, when we really decide to bring it in working class communities, let's let it not just be Black and brown folks. Let's go after all the working class communities. And we can do that because we no longer just show up with sticks. We also, because of the IRA and our success with all the related bills, show up with carrots and a vision to build a new economy that should really appeal to working class people. And I think in America, it's always easier to talk about a lack of racial diversity than a lack of class diversity. However, we are called in this decade to build a movement that's big enough to win. We're going to have to deal with both.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that point, Ben. I just was digesting the most recent results of the Sierra member reader survey. And not only is it college educated, it's a lot of folks on our list have got graduate degrees and advanced degrees. So yes, I think you make a really sharp point there about how to break down those class barriers. Thank you all for so many questions. We've got a lot of them. Again, if you have a question, if you want to bring something to Ben's attention, you want to hear his take on something, use that little Q&A button at the bottom of the screen there. We've got at least another 10 more minutes for questions. Ben, you talked a lot when you started about outings, and that as I anticipated, did strike a chord because there's a lot of questions in here about outings. And really the questions all kind of boil down to the tensions between travel and sustainability. Like, how do we get people? One person says, well, God, it kind of seems like, and I'm paraphrasing here because I lost the question, that outings can kind of seem like a, travel agency. And someone else said, well, there's the carbon, there's the flight miles, there's all the other stuff that goes along with it. So how do we strike that balance between exploring and like getting out into exciting places and also not, I guess, gobbling up more than our fair share?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think the outings you see in the magazine tend to be the national outings and the international outings. There is travel involved with that. It's also true that our Angeles chapter, which is just Los Angeles County, did 1,300 outings last year. 92 of those for school kids. The rest just local folks getting out into nature together. One of the things that we will work on, I don't know if it's the first year, the second year, the third year, but sometime in the next 5 years, is we will get a platform up where you'll have an app that you can see all of the different local outings and sign up for them. And that means that when you travel, you're visiting your daughter or you're visiting your grandma and you want to just be active with the local Sierra Club, you'll be able to see like what outing is happening here. Not only does that consume less carbon than our national outings and our international outings, just going on an outing in your local area, it's also way cheaper. There's one outing in Southern California that's offered both as a national outing and as a local outing. If you do it as a local outing, it's $60. I think it's a 2-night overnight backpacking trip. If you do it as a national outing, it is many multiples of that. So kind of getting hip to what's going on with different chapters as far as their outings, not only does it save a whole lot of carbon, it might save you a whole lot of cash too.
Yeah, thanks for plugging local outings. I think if folks sometimes can lose track of them. Most of the outings we do are not going to Patagonia or Nepal. They're going to your backyard. I know you've got some people in your close circle, basically your family, who are involved in entertainment and the media. And we have a question here from Barbara, who's wondering, like, how can we leverage the power of Hollywood films, of TV, to broadcast, I guess is what Barbara's asking here, an environmentalist, a conservationist, a climate justice message. Any thoughts there on creating more, and especially having worked at People for the American Way? How can we do that?
By the way, the poster over my shoulder is Dave Chappelle when we were 20 years old. I don't know if you can see it. The tickets were $3 for the students and $5 for the adults. He and Stacey Abrams and I planned that concert. Stacey and I were like 19, 20 years old. The governor of Mississippi was trying to turn a black college into a prison, and we beat him in that campaign. We absolutely, look, we've been around for 130 years. If you know us, you know us. If you know us, you tend to love us. Folks love the Sierra Club. They see us, by the way, as an outings group. People who know the Sierra Club who aren't active in it think first and foremost of us as the people who get you into the outdoors. And honestly, that's good for our political agenda because it's kind of makes us sort of like mom and apple pie. And so, one of the reasons why we will lean into it also gives us help with getting more celebrities involved and increasing our brand and visibility in TV shows and movies and things like that. The NAACP had a team that focused on that when I was there, and we will eventually build that team here too. Jason, you and I got to put heads together because we got a real A-list celebrity who wants to be the guest editor of the magazine soon, and I think that will be the start. That'll put down a marker that we're serious about having a relationship with culture. The other thing I'd say is that we, you take a group like the Dixie Chicks, they're the best selling country act in American history. Those types of, groups like that, where you have people who have political consciousness. Chris Stapleton is another who's popular now. We should be outreaching too systematically. Again, the NAACP does work like that, and we eventually will too. I think it's a very smart question. One of the things that's frustrating for the club is that our brand isn't as well known as it should be, and partnering with cultural leaders definitely is a way to get that done.
Thanks for that. I love that. Now I'm looking behind your shoulder. That poster is too cool. I want to thank you, Ben, for making the time for this. I want to thank all the hundreds of people, our members, our supporters, our champions, our volunteer leaders, all of you who made time in your schedules today on a work day to do this. Thank you for being so engaged. Unfortunately, we are going to have to get toward wrapping it up. We wanted to end, and the Hollywood conversation was fun. We want to end on a slightly lighter note to really get to know Ben a little bit more as a person. So we've got a lightning round here of some fun questions. I'll really, hopefully for you all make Ben into a real person and not just the executive director, not just a title. So here, Ben, you ready for the lightning round?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. What's your favorite meal?
Favorite meal is eggplant parm, and it's waiting for me right now.
Right on. What's on your nightstand right now? I think what the question is, what book's on your nightstand right now? What are you reading?
Sure. I've got six degrees on my nightstand. Our new chief strategy officer, Phil Radford, former head of Greenpeace USA, gave that to me as a gift. And I'm about halfway through it. And I have Rumi and Khalil Gibran. That is the reading that kind of puts me to sleep. It's the last thought of the day most days.
Right on. What's a place in nature that connects you to awe and wonder?
Big Sur, California, and specifically there's a beach called Fuller's Cove. It's a very local beach that literally has an old school rusted kind of locals only sign. Got to hike about a mile and a half down a cliff and then descend down a rope in order to surf. But I've been surfing there since I was 14 years old. And it's way down the south end of Big Sur. So you sort of get kind of rebaptized in the redwoods and the physical grandeur of Big Sur before you get there. And then once you get there, it's like the inner sanctum of heaven for surfing.
Well, Ben, thank you for sharing all those. Thank you for sharing some of your own personal life with us. Again, want to thank everybody who tuned in today. Please stay tuned, stay engaged. You will be getting follow-up emails from this, opportunities to get engaged with Earth Month, opportunities to get engaged with obviously all of our different local campaigns, our national campaigns to promote clean air, clean water, a healthy and stable environment, and access points to wild nature. Ben, I want to give you the last word. Anything you want to share with all these members and volunteer leaders who joined today?
I just want to say thank you, not just for joining, but for the work you do every day. My job here is to support each of you and really, all of us in building a stronger club for this century, and one that makes sure that not just the planet survives, because it will, but that humanity survives for many, many more. It is an exciting mission to be a part of. And it's just an honor to work with everybody. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your wealth. Thank you for your wisdom. Go fight, win. I am optimistic that we will succeed, but it's going to take all of us. And I really appreciate everybody who's part of this.
And that's a wrap, folks. Go safe. Take care of yourselves and each other.